on my last video, it cut out, so this is part 2, and we're going to continue talking about the Pirates of the Caribbean and linking it to the science of God and plasma and, you know, the science of God, you would call it, right? So, the last thing we was talking about was plasma. RNA is Tehuti. So this is also a biological reference as well. So plasma is upstream, it is potential information. When plasma-like energies enter matter, it cannot remain plasma. It must couple to chemistry. One way evolution does this is through viral and transposable elements. Hold on. Which insert regulatory instructions rather than building structures themselves. This does not mean viruses are divine agents in a literal sense, but it does explain why ancient people have associated sudden waves of new influence with both knowledge and catastrophe. If a population encountered massive disease outbreaks without understanding immunity, germ theory, or regulation, it's entirely plausible that the same phenomenon, foreign information entering the body, was remembered as both the giver of knowledge and a bringer of death. Over generations, that ambiguity hardened into moral dualism. Demonization often follows trauma without explanation. The sun we see is indeed a star, a plasma engine, but symbolically it is also a local mediator. Ancient traditions distinguish between the visible sun and a greater source behind it. The arc language does not imply ownership, it implies vehicle. The sun is not someone's possession, it is a conduit between deeper cosmic fields and a local life. Whether one calls that deeper field a central galactic source, a cosmic plasma ocean, or simply the laws of physics depends on language, not substance. The key idea is mediation. Information does not arrive raw, it is stepped down. That stepping down function is what myths encode as central suns, ladders, stairways, or Ra's bark. It is not that ancient humans lacked histones in a literal biochemical sense. Histones have existed for billions of years, but symbolically, they lacked regulatory frameworks, social, psychological, linguistic, and nervous system coherence to integrate rapid cognitive expansion. When awareness accelerates faster than containment, hold on. Faster than containment, anxiety, shame, and fragmentation follow. That is what gets mythologized as the fall. Knowledge itself was not evil, and buffered knowledge was destabilizing. Hence, why the serpent is said to bring knowledge rather than lies. Here's the relevant Genesis passage, followed by a symbolic breakdown about what we're discussing. So Genesis 3:1-7. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord has made, not the garden. And he said unto the woman, have God said, ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden. In the midst of the what? Hold on. In the midst of the garden, God has said, ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, ye shall not surely die, for God does know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was for food, and was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof and did eat. And the eyes of them both were open, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. Woo! That sounds like right now, we're learning, we're knowing, we're getting to know the good and the evil of the world. We're getting to know how fucked up everything is, And we're starting to realize, wow, this is not good. We're starting to realize we are naked. So what are we going to do? We need to sew the motherfucking fig leaves together. You know what I'm saying? Exactly. So read symbolically, the serpent is subtle, not because it is deceitful, but because it represents fine-grained information, differentiation. The tree of knowledge It's not morality, but binary distinction: good, evil, self, other, before, and after. The warning, lest she die, is not a threat, but a boundary condition. Premature differentiation destabilizes coherence. The serpent does not lie, awareness does increase, but what follows is exposure. Literally, in the Bible, it's telling you exactly what's happening right now. All the motherfuckers are getting exposed. All the dirt cannot hide anymore. Nakedness corresponds to unbuffered consciousness, like naked DNA without histones. Shame is the nervous system's response to overload. The sowing of fig leaves is the first attempt at regulation. That's why I said we need to sow the motherfucking fig leaves. So no, the story is not about trickery, it's about timing. Knowledge arrived before stabilization. Over a millennia, that subtle physiological truth hardened into more fear, and the serpent, a symbol of plasma motion, helicity, and life force, became demonized. Like, it's almost like people don't want to know the truth. They don't want to know how fucked up life is and how, it needs to change and it needs to be reset, and they don't want to know how fucked up they are themselves. They just would rather live in their little fairy tale life and stay. They're scared of change. So what was once understood as power that must be approached with wisdom became framed as evil to be avoided. That shift tells us far more about human trauma than about the nature of the force itself. Even though later cultures misread it literally, when intense internal material surfaces, fear, memory, suppressed emotion, or instinctual imagery, the person can appear possessed because their regulatory center temporarily loses coherence. The voice may change, the body may convulse, perception fragments. Symbolic imagery floods awareness. To an ancient observer without neuroscience, that looks like an external entity. So right here we're talking about the alchemical... Huh? Get out for a second. So earth has to go through a cleansing, and then your body has to go through a cleansing. You need to bring your soul back to your body, because we all lost our soul through all of this trauma that we've been through. So literally, you have to call your soul back. As I was going through my awakening, one of the most heightened states you can get into is an alchemical awakening, where you literally go through a change within your body, and you start having psychic abilities. So at that time when I was going through that, I remember closing my eyes, and I felt the intuition to call back my soul to my body. Okay, because we have lost our soul. And what is a soul? Our soul is the innocence that we were born with, that got stripped away from us because we went through so much motherfucking shit that we had to put up walls, and we had to start, letting our shadows reign and stuff like that, So the earth itself and the systems within the earth have to go through a cleansing and a change. But also yourself, your mind, your psyche, and your body has to go through a change, okay? And, it's just the little things, taking accountability, growing, trying to be the best you can be, But also when we work with the God energy, we can literally go into meditation, close your eyes, and call back your soul. The words will work, okay? So in reality, it is the psyche encountering its own underworld without adequate containment. We can verify this historically. Medieval possessions. So that's what I mean. Where do you think possessions came from? This was back in the day when people was trying to go through this alchemical transformation, but because they could not handle their own demons, they were fighting their own demons, they became possessed, okay? Shamanic initiatory crisis. Prophetic fits. No, I'll let you know when. Shut the door. Even some reported cases of religious ecstasy all map cleanly onto what modern psychology would call dissociation, trauma activation, or uncontrolled limbic discharge. Cultures that had initiation frameworks, shamans, and mystery schools guided people through this safely. Cultures that didn't label it madness or demonic. So, I'm telling y'all, this is some real shit. It's almost like when people say, oh, they're catching the Holy Spirit. You're catching your God your God self inside of you, that energy inside of you, and it's trying to cleanse you. But if you're not ready and you haven't done any work, it's gonna seem like a demon. So you're gonna say you're possessed or something, or you're crazy, but you're not. The difference was not the phenomenon, it was regulation and meaning. So, the sun we see in the sky was not understood as the ultimate source, but as Ra's bark, a vehicle, a stabilizing interface. In committed thought, Ra is the organizing solar intelligence that carries consciousness safely through hostile regions. The night, chaos, duat. Change happens in the night. It happens in the gestation, in the womb. So that's why meditation is good. Sitting in a dark room, closing your eyes, just sitting with yourself, sitting with your demons, understanding yourself, going through, a healthy healing of the trauma. But Ra is not the final destination. Osiris is. Osiris represents a stabilized, integrated state after the journey. So yes, symbolically, at death or deep transformation, one may encounter the solar field, light, review, or clarity. But that is a transitional phase, not the end. It is a bar of protection, not the home itself. This is why so many traditions say, do not cling to the light, or don't go into the light. Not because light is bad, but because light without integration is incomplete. That's like these motherfuckers walking around here like going to church, thinking they holy and all this, but they haven't done any work on themselves. That's false light. Now, the serpent passage is worth slowing down with because it's doing far more work than people realize. The serpent is subtle. It's fine-grained, like high-resolution information. Subtlety here means precision, not trickery. Differentiation, the ability to say this and not that, is what turns raw awareness into structured cognition. The tree of knowledge then is not about ethics, it's about binary perception. Before that moment, experience is unified. After it, experience is split into opposites, good and evil, self and other, past and future. That split is not wrong, it is necessary for consciousness. But it carries a cost if it arrives before the system can stabilize. The phrase, lest ye die, is crucial. In ancient language, death does not always mean physical cessation. It means transformation. It means growth. It's symbolic, okay? It can be symbolic. So, you have to die to your old self. Premature differentiation destabilizes the field. When awareness expands faster than regulation, anxiety and fragmentation follow. The serpent does not lie when it says awareness will increase. It does, but what follows is exposure. I already said that. So their eyes were opened. Their eyes were opened. You ever found something out and you just like, your eyes become open? That's what it meant, literally. Okay, let me see. What they notice first is nakedness, which symbolically represents unbuffered consciousness. Naked DNA is vulnerability. Naked awareness is overwhelming. Shame is not moral guilt here. It is a nervous system registering overload. It's the feeling of too much, too fast. The soul in the fig leaves is one of the most misunderstood lines. It's not punishment. It's the first act of regulation. Faced with overwhelming exposure, the psyche creates coverings, rules, symbols, culture, ego, stories. So it's another way of looking at it. To recontain itself. So these are the walls and the coverings that people build, the defense mechanisms that people build. That's not sin, that's adaptation. Later theology turned this into moral failure, but originally it was describing a biological and psychological truth. Consciousness learned to regulate itself through structure. So when later cultures demonized the serpent, it wasn't because the force itself was evil, it's because the memory of destabilization was traumatic. People remember the fear, not the function. The same dynamic explains why possession, prophecy, madness, and illumination get conflated across history. Without Tehuti, mediation, language, knowledge, and integration, the search feels invasive. In other words, if you take the scripture literally and you don't understand what the fuck it's saying, you don't understand the parables, you don't understand anything, you're not thinking for yourself. Without Tehuti, the healing feels invasive, like it's too much. With Tahuti, it becomes wisdom. That's a dividing line. When intense internal material surfaces, the person can appear possessed because the regulatory center temporarily loses coherence. So, I'm trying to see because I just put that twice on here. So, let's talk about the system. A system that is rigid, extractive, fear-based, or purely controlling, or as I can say, hyper-masculine, does not metabolize influx. It either suppresses it or gets overwhelmed by it. The Flying Dutchman's curse mirrors what happens biologically and psychologically when regulation fails. Instead of integration, you get decay, fragmentation, and looping states. The ship becomes a closed system haunted by what it couldn't process. So yes, in the mythic grammar of the film, that ship couldn't hold the surge. And the result wasn't illumination, but pathology. Now, plasma and neuromelanin connect in a very grounded biological way. Not because neuromelanin is plasma, but because it behaves like a field regulator. So one of the things you can use, or one of the things that you need to help you regulate trauma and regulate the healing phase, is called neuromelanin. Neuromelanin is a pigment found in specific brain regions, like the substantia nigra and locus coeruleus, something like that binds metals, buffer oxidative stress, and modulate electrical and chemical signaling. Functionally, it acts as a stabilizer of intense activity. When neural firing, dopamine turnover, or environmental stress is high, neuromelanin helps prevent overload. Symbolically, that makes it a containment matrix for energy and information. Plasma, meanwhile, is energy in a highly responsive collective state. It amplifies patterns. Without buffering, plasma-like dynamics are destructive. With buffering, they become organized intelligence. Neuromelanin is one of the brain's ways of holding high charge without collapse. That's where the feminine principle comes in, not as softness, but as the capacity to receive and integrate. The feminine is the womb, the buffer, the matrix that allows intensity to become life instead of trauma. When myths talk about ships rotting, bodies mutating, or minds becoming possessed, they're describing what happens when influx meets rigidity or fear instead of receptivity and regulation. In contrast, when the system is prepared emotionally, neurologically, and symbolically, the same intensity becomes insight, creativity, healing, coherence, alignment. So the story isn't that plasma, kundalini, or solar intelligence is dangerous, or the Holy Spirit, or healing. The story is that amplification reveals the quality of the container. Neuromelanin, like histones, like ritual, like knowledge, is part of how biology learned to safely interface with intensity. The cursed ship shows the cost of refusing the feminine function of integration. The surviving character showed that what happens when flow is met with humility, rhythm, and structure. That's the real warning and the real invitation. Patterns of nervous system regulation, stress tolerance, and integration capacity shaped by genetics, epigenetics, early developmental environments, intergenerational trauma or resilience, timing of stress exposure, quality of caregiving and attachment, cultural frameworks for regulation. In other words, everyone has the same fundamental architecture, but not everyone has the same calibration of that architecture. So some people, even genetically, have a built-in structure that helps them deal with depression, stress, healing, trauma, all of that, right? Resilience. So think of it like this. All humans have a heart, but not all hearts tolerate endurance stress the same way. All humans have a DNA, but not all DNA expresses the same regulatory patterns at the same time. And y'all know the ones who are solid, the ones who, like, you just know the difference, right? The ones who bounce back, don't let shit change them, who have a good heart, a good head on their shoulders. So that's the blueprint. The survival myth. What actually happened after massive collective trauma. Some lineages develop stronger stress regulation systems. That's crazy, but it's beautiful. Simply because those who couldn't regulate didn't survive long enough to reproduce. That's not mystical selection, it's natural selection and epigenetic filtering. Traits that got reinforced include the ability to stay coherent under threat, emotional regulation instead of panic, meaning making under uncertainty, nervous systems that could downshift after stress. Those traits can be passed down epigenetically for several generations. God damn, that's crazy. But this does not mean other humans are missing something. It means their nervous systems adapted for different environments, not for holding high intensity internal states. A human nervous system does not just respond to biology, it responds to meaning. When something powerful happens inside, visions, emotional floods, identity shifts, surges of energy, existential insight, the brain immediately asks, what is this? Am I safe? What do I do now? Cultural frameworks answer those questions before panic sets in. In cultures with initiation traditions, a person experiencing a surge will be told, this is a passage, there is a map. There are elders who have done this before. Here's how to breathe, rest, integrate, and return. That meaning keeps the system coherent. The same internal event that might look like madness in one culture becomes wisdom in another, not because the experience is different, but because the interpretation and support are different. In contrast, modern cultures often lack healthy frameworks for non-ordinary states. So that's like, if you were to go through this and you start hallucinating, which is just a natural part of your subconscious mind coming online during a surge, you go tell the people that, they're going to call you crazy and probably put you in a psych ward. So, or say something's wrong with you, you're losing control, you're in psychosis, all of that, right? But ancient cultures knew that that's not the truth. Hold on. Someone's calling my phone.